Joining Jim Tobin, please welcome the Director of the New Economy Initiative, Pamela Lewis, Operations and Strategy for Ford X, Kristen Welch, and to moderate the discussion, columnist and Associate Business Editor of the Detroit News, Daniel Howes.
Very interesting, Jim. We had a conversation about this about a week ago, and you've certainly got a lot of great observations. I want to set the table a little bit. The statistic of $300 billion over the next few years, I looked at my notes, I think it was over 10. Yes. But what you told me was it was an increase from 90.
Yeah.
So there's a massive expansion in a very short period of time in terms of what OEMs, major suppliers, tech companies are looking to spend in the space in electrification. What are the fundamental drivers in that?
Well, I think the markets, the cities with some of the pollution issues that if anybody's ever been to China, if you want to get a new car in Shanghai, the only way you can really get one today is to get an electric vehicle. Prior to that, it was $10,000 for a license plate. You had to buy the license plate before you got the car. But you look at the whole ecosystem across the globe, and a lot of the drivers from government, from industry, that we have to reduce the overall pollution. And I see the key driver right now in that is China. I saw a number not too long ago that just the Chinese government alone has infused over $100 billion into development of electric vehicles.
But isn't the government buying more of those vehicles than the people in the market?
Well, if you look at statistics in last year, in China, 60% of the true EVs sold in China was the government, without a doubt. And I think they want to target 10% of their total vehicle sales in 2025 to be pure electric, which is about 3 million units.
Have we already reached a point where capital is moving more on the electrification side and away from the ICE side? I mean, some of your graphics would seem to suggest that.
Well, when we look at electrification, we use a building block. We know what it takes to get to true electrification, but some of the same developments and technologies needed for a true EV are required for the hybrids. So there's definitely a shift from pure ICE to hybrids, and we see in North America, based on affordability, price of gas, lack of infrastructure, that hybrids will be the area of growth in the short term.
All of this really kind of speaks to, I think, a cultural change inside a lot of companies. They're having to look for different kinds of talent. Kristen, you kind of play in that space. How are the OEMs and the tier ones working with startups, working with people that really never in their wildest dreams would have probably thought that they were going to be working in automotive, and now they're in the tech space, but they're working in automotive?
Yeah, so I have the, the unique experience of having worked both on the startup side, but also now on the OEM side, addressing that exact problem. Where do we pull the talent from, and how do we create a safe space for them to work in, to think and create and make almost? It's almost like a startup climate in a larger organization. How do we not swallow them up and suffocate them? And so having worked in startups, I started at Split that was acquired by Bosch, saw that transition. And then another startup, and now at Ford X, we are creating that safe space. And I think large organizations are trying to do that. It helps you identify gaps in your approach for the future, helps you bring in the talent to help fill those gaps, think of that technology, build those new elements, and then you're moving forward. But it's a tough challenge to get the talent to understand that that's what you're trying to do.
But do the managers, the CEOs, the company, do they understand that? I mean, famously in this town was something called the GM bear hug. You know, General Motors would buy a company because they thought it had some really good technology, and they would envelop it and they'd kill it.
Yep.
CEO Mary Barra, when they made that huge investment in cruise automation, was very explicit, in my understanding, to say, we are not going to do that to you. We are going to allow you to do what you do. We're not going to move you to Michigan. You're going to stay out in San Francisco. How hard is it to get a company to actually walk the talk as opposed to just talking it?
Yeah, I think it's still hard. I think everybody in the room probably knows that. It's a challenge. And I would suggest and challenge everyone to think about a fast no, if that's the environment, because startups can't keep that contract on the table for 2 years and keep negotiating and keep reworking and that kind of stuff. We just need to either embrace and use that tech talent and or technology, or move on quickly.
You know, Jim made the point about making the most, I think, complex product in the world. I would also take it a step further. It is one of the most regulated products in the world. There are whole armies of people inside these companies, these major automotive companies, that are all about compliance, legality, liability, containing all those kinds of things. On the other hand, you have a tech space where there is virtually no regulation. There is no culture of guarding against that. And it's a culture of innovation, risk-taking, failure. The auto industry doesn't want to fail because there are huge costs for failure. How do you bridge that gap as we go into this space deeper and deeper and get deeper and deeper into it?
You know, our comment when we look at development, you know, failure will be there, but we always say fail fast and fail cheap. So let's have a funnel of many opportunities, but let's make sure we get to the point where we're not going to fail and it's going to be an expensive failure. Because I think a company like Magna, what we deal with is we're on the New York Stock Exchange. And we're held by sometimes different milestones than some of the other startups out there, that we still have to show returns today as we're showing evidence of investment into the future. And it's a fine balance that we have to have as a company, because we have to make sure we take care of our key stakeholders.
Right.
Sorry, Dino.
And there are so many learnings in that. There's data coming out of it. How do you monetize that data? How do you learn and value the learnings around failure and use that in the business to create something else or to move in a different direction?
But do you think people in the tech space appreciate I mean, we've seen this story with the Elon Musk Tesla story about we know how to build cars, and it turned out they really didn't know how to build cars. And they didn't want to have people, they didn't want to hire people. And I've talked to people who came from the big three space and were working for him, and the system has spit them all out and they've all left. Is there an appreciation that getting into automotive gets you into a whole different kind of world that is governed by a lot of rules that just don't apply in Silicon Valley?
You know, my rule of thumb has been, it's not what you know, it's what you don't know. And you know, there's many times when people come into the automotive space, they really don't understand the complexity. But having said that, as automotive suppliers, we didn't know a lot of the tech world either. So we got to work together as we go forward, because we see the convergence of technologies coming together.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, and let's think about moving things, not people, maybe, and test and trial different technologies. I actually know an autonomous delivery company, I'm on the board, that is using auto quality autonomous vehicles to move things, so the regulations aren't there. So we can ride it on the sidewalk or drive it on the sidewalk, or you know, so I think we need to think about maybe micro-mobility, the whole ecosystem around mobility, and areas where we can learn and grow and research and inform core manufacturing functions. But we're learning from these non-regulated or under-regulated spaces before they're hyper-regulated.
What's happening in the startup space in Southeast Michigan?
You're asking me that?
Yeah.
No, I'm just poking with you. There's a lot going on. A New Economy Initiative, for those of you that may not realize, there's a silent partner that's helping to mitigate risk as it relates to entrepreneurship and innovation in Southeast Michigan called Philanthropy. So we've been at it for 12 years. I just realized NEI and MICHauto are the same age. In 2007, 10 foundations came together and put together a large fund.
I remember that.
It was $100 million at the time. It's grown to about 150. And it's a strategic grant-making fund. So we've been making investments in Invest Detroit Venture teams or Tech Town, Ann Arbor Spark, Automation Alley, to inspire and encourage individuals to have a easier access and path to create and start businesses. So we've been seeing a lot of this in terms of, to Glenn's point, I think we pulled away from talking about industry diversification all the time and learned that we do need to build off of the automotive industry, but there's also a lot of industries that are intersecting with it. One thing that's been really important to us, though, has been who's at the table, and how can philanthropy has also been playing this role to make sure that there's more women and people of color and immigrants that are getting opportunities to start and grow businesses as well. So there's a lot going on.
This is a big company town, has been for 100 years. And it was always, you work for big companies, that was success. If you were an entrepreneur, it reminded me when I was a correspondent in Germany, entrepreneur was a bad word in Germany.
Yeah.
If you were an entrepreneur,
That means
10
you
years ago, it meant you couldn't
find
get
a
hired
job.
by big
Right.
companies. It
That's
meant
right.
that you were, it's totally different here. But I wonder how if you've seen development and evolution in the attitude towards startups and
absolutely.
innovation.
I think you could say the same thing here, right? 15 years ago, if you were an entrepreneur, that meant you weren't working for one of the big threes or the suppliers. Maybe you couldn't get a job. That's completely changed. You see also entrepreneurship not just in the tech space or innovation-led space, but even the growth space. I mean, you look at Joe McClure or Nyla Ellis Brown, Ellis Island Tea that you can get in your Sam's Club, or McClure Pickles, as well as Split or May Mobility. These are the types of companies that are now coming out of our region. And a lot of cases, people don't realize a lot of these founders are getting support from organizations that are funded by philanthropy. Our interest, though, in mobility, not just because, I have this bent toward science with an engineering background, but our interest in mobility is really stemming from two different angles. One has to do with how can we ensure that the innovation that is happening because of the great assets that are here that Glenn talked about, how can we also make sure those are turned to look at the great challenges that we have? You talk about jobs and workforce and readying a community to be able to take on mobility-based jobs. Job readiness is one thing, job access is another. In a lot of cases, people are having challenges getting to jobs. And so what's the solution of mobility? Philanthropy is asking ourselves, how can we influence the mobility conversations to also consider how those great assets and innovations can address some now problems?
Well, at the rate transit discussions go around here, it's going to be mobility companies that are going to be delivering people to work, not some kind of regional transit. I'm curious about flipping this startup 180 degrees. Go out to California, Silicon Valley. You spend some time out there, a lot of time, as I understand it. What is there even an attitude about Southeast Michigan or Michigan out there insofar as the auto space? Would people really even seriously consider leaving the Golden State to come to Michigan to start an auto startup?
Yeah, anecdotally, we brought someone in from Austin, Texas 3 years ago to work in Split and ride sharing in Detroit. And that was the biggest story. And I think it's changed even since then a lot. But that was such a great story that someone would leave cool Austin to come to now cool Detroit to work here. And then we brought in developers and we brought in other people. California, it's a challenge because the cost of living, obviously, but then the salaries are commensurate. And so you're looking on paper and people don't know. They need to come here. I say, let's show them, let's tell them. I love that at the bottom of your pillar, Glenn, there was that kind of PR and the message that we're getting out there, because I think we need more trumpet blowing, and I see, MEDC at CES, and that's great, and we're all there on the ground trying to say, no, it's cool, and it's great, and all the tangential technologies and companies that we're building have opportunity for you guys. You don't need to go to a coast, and it especially hits me hard when our local universities and state universities, the kids that are graduating go somewhere else for the big bucks on paper. But we want to show them, and I think we're making strides, but there's still some work to go, show them that it is here, it's happening here, we're developing that, the car is technology and that future mobility, and just to keep them in state or to bring people in, we need more PR, I think.
Let's go around the horn. What are the barriers to improving that Michigan? Is it its burden of history? Is it the fact that its K through 12 education system is a mess and continues to be a mess? You mentioned cost of living. Is there a quality of life perception about living here and working here? I'd be interested in everybody's take because you're all coming from different perspectives. Let's start with you.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we've been hearing as it relates to entrepreneurs, because we have been seeing a lot of West Coast entrepreneurs moving here, is the community of support that they feel here that they don't feel on the West Coast. I think you're exactly right. I think there are some elephants in the room as it relates to the educational system, as it relates to what happens with spatial mismatch of people that 60% of the people that live in Detroit are actually leaving Detroit to find suitable jobs. And the jobs that are being handled here are typically people that aren't from Detroit. I mean, these are elephants in the room that are very important and need to be addressed. But I think that how we message what's happening here is important. I think it's important to message the assets, but I also think it's important for us to be realistic about the challenges. And I also think that this is a place that is drawing the type of talent that wants to solve problems, the type of talent that sees the opportunity of being in a place where they can make a huge difference. And that's what we're starting to see in terms of the type of talent that's being drawn in. But we also have an opportunity to make sure that we retain the talent that's here. You know, and what are the opportunities that we're giving them to find their path in these new economy jobs?
What's your take?
Yeah, K through 12, I think everybody's in violent agreement in the state that we need improvement. It's going to take some time, but we need improvement. We need to generate the future in our own backyard, in addition to going outside thereof. And then also there's other things we can do here to help give the kids of Detroit, the kids of Metro Detroit and the state an opportunity. And you know, I just was down at Focus Hope not too long ago, and we were really focused on robotics training in the Focus Hope Training Center, and we did get robots in, and they are up and running, and there is a curriculum. And now we're bridging, we've got general managers in the Metro Detroit area that are down there interviewing kids, because you know, if you go to any of our plants, Metro Detroit, in the state of Michigan, if a robot programmer walked in, we would hire him. And when you look at the perception of Detroit, and I've grown up here over the years, I think there's an awareness and perception problem outside of Detroit. Because as we look at this, the West Coast, and it's a different world out there, and it's very expensive to live out there, but as we have our co-located engineering staff in Palo Alto with Lyft, and we bring some of those engineers to Detroit, it's kind of the wow factor. Wow, we didn't know Detroit was like this. And I think we have to continue to publicize and create the awareness that it's a pretty cool area to live. And we're seeing more and more of that as we bring in people from Europe as well as the West Coast and show them what's really happening here. I think it's going to gain momentum over time.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. No.
Well, if I could add to, you triggered a thought, because the other asset that we have here is collaboration. Right? I mean, we see it within...
Meaning what? I mean, meaning
well,
that...
so for example, you see it within the foundation community.
There's more of a culture of it here?
There's a culture of collaboration here, and it's through different sectors. It's even cross-sectoral, because we have the collaboration of foundations, but I think of the work that WIN is doing, Workforce Intelligence Network, where you have corporates, private sector, government, and colleges sitting together trying to figure out how can they equip people for jobs.
Yeah, and I think that culture is really, you know, that we saw that on display, vivid display in the bankruptcy.
That's right.
And I think that kind of created a kind of this works. Hey, this really works.
It's hard, but it works.
But it works. Yeah. And they've had a lot of wins about it. What about barriers?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to hit on that because I think the collaborative culture here is so distinctly different. So I do spend, my whole team sits out in Silicon Valley, they're in Palo Alto, and I spend a lot of time out there, have done for the last few years in the startup community. Silicon Valley Leadership Group I was a member of and had an opportunity to sit on their mobility kind of transportation board, and it doesn't feel like this there. So you're out there, you're on your own, and they've seen unicorns before, so people are throwing big money after ideas, which is great, but they're not then kind of rounding up and drawing from the community and creating that sense of familiarity with the businesses that spurs growth. So if you have that moonshot, great, but if not, everybody else is just kind of going by the wayside. Here, we've got all of these organizations we've been talking about this morning, and Planet M has the landing zone over in WeWork where a bunch of mobility-related technology companies sit and can bounce ideas off of each other, and then you've got the Bosches and the Fords who also have space there. I think it's just a great collaborative space. But we're not hitting, I think, also what Chris Thomas and Jessica Robinson are doing with the Masters in Mobility. I don't think they're in the room today, maybe. But I think that's a good thing, because I would love to think that we're growing our own crop of the next generation workforce, and that we don't have to convince those from other places to come in and do this with us together. But I had the opportunity to go to a career day and speak on Friday in a middle school. And that's when it really hit me, we need to, these kids with their STEAM and STEM knowledge, I'd say, who in the room is a gamer? And it'd be like, everybody, even the girls, And then, okay, who knows about robotics? Some of the kids have done CES summer camps, they've done auto design, they've done some CAD CAM work. I'm like, okay, who's a developer? Maybe one? One kid with a SpaceX t-shirt raised his hand, actually. So, it's like we need to, and we talk about this a lot, but hitting them earlier and getting them excited. I know some of the big companies are doing this. Ford is we have a Women in Technology group that's in schools and with Girl Scouts and things and talking about this, but we need more of that.
There was I wrote about this recently, there was a recent report by a firm called Navigant Research, and they create a leaderboard of who the leaders are in autonomous vehicle testing. And they do it in quadrants, and you look at this, and looking at the quadrant of the leader, who do you think the leaders are? The leaders. Ford.
I think it's Ford Automobility, and Waymo.
It was Waymo,
GM.
Ford, and GM.
And Cruise,
And Waymo's partner is Fiat Chrysler. So there, if you sit and look at this thing, you say, well, wait a minute. The leaders in automotive vehicle autonomous vehicle testing are all three Detroit companies. Yet, you have this very poor understanding that I think you guys are trying to get at in your marketing, saying the car, what did you say, the car doesn't just use technology, it is technology.
It is technology. Yeah.
That is not being understood, I think, in the investment community, clearly in some of the tech community. It's developing, it's here, it's real, and people who are paid to track it, like a Navigant Research, they know it. So how do you square the circle?
Well, one thing, Daniel, that we continue to look at is there's some great technology out there, and there are many companies, whether they're startups or they're existing technologies. What we're able to do is auto-qualify it. We understand the automotive industry. We understand the safety and the regulatory side of things. So we're welcoming partnership to help auto-qualify the technologies needed for the car of the future.
Kristen, how do you break through? Is it just time? Results?
And more messaging, communication. Results help. I think investment's one of the big problems. Like, it's easy to put $50,000 into a software technology, but when you're building hardware, the investment value and the CapEx is so much larger, and we need to get behind these ideas, and maybe it's corporate VC money, I'm not sure, but it's difficult to convince because people really don't understand.
How important is it for government, local, state, let's put federal aside for a second, to partner here? And do you to what extent, again, drawing on your experiences dealing with California tech and all that stuff, is the state really an issue in a place like California, or is it really that there's a whole ecosystem of innovation that kind of drives itself?
I feel like it's the ecosystem. I don't know. I think Michigan's done a great job. We've got a lot of state support. Michigan Mobility Challenge, the legislative changes, the level 5 kind of future look, I think is here. And
well, I think you had a governor who understood that. I mean, who was very, Rick Snyder was like lasered on this space, no question about it.
Without a doubt, in order for us to get to the next level, especially in autonomous driving, the state has to be at the table. They have to be a key part of it. MDOT has to be a key part of it. Once we fix the roads, what's the infrastructure needed to get to L5? L5 technology is not that far off. I think everybody would agree. But I think we'll see it in geofenced areas. And until we really understand the infrastructure and the whole ecosystem needed to support it, it's going to take time to get it in a big way across the industry.
One of the things we haven't talked about yet, and I do want to hit it before we run out of time, is diversity. And whether Detroit and Southeast Michigan, that's an advantage in terms of workforce. and how that maybe contrasts with the tech space.
Yeah, I was thinking about the whole talent conversation and diversity, because I think I was looking at Glenn's report, and it talked about the type of jobs that this industry can bring on are jobs that are over $50,000 a year, right? And you look at a community like Detroit or communities like Tecumseh or Hillsdale who are working hard to make $50,000 a year. And that Alice report that just came out stated that you need about that in order to take care of your 5 basic needs of housing, transportation, daycare, and health. And so I keep thinking about what's the opportunity to ready a workforce for the mobility industry that's coming, and how do we equip people that are in communities like Pontiac or Detroit or Tecumseh to prepare for those jobs. Because diversity does matter, because you have a community that is primarily diverse. And how do you make sure that you're not leaving anyone behind in this particular industry? And then using mobility solutions to solve job access problems is also a part of that. So it's all connected.
Well, and people who can understand certain experiences that other people can't understand, they bring that to the table.
That's right. I call them experiential experts.
Yeah.
So you have an individual that's catching 5 buses just to get to work, and it takes 3 hours when they only live 20 minutes away, which is what you have in a city like Detroit, which a lot of people don't realize. They are an experiential expert in terms of what a mobility solution can do for them, and how do we engage that person at the table to talk about these things.
Kristen, do you have a final thought?
Just the final thought is diverse teams make better decisions, so I think there's the profit motive there too. I mean, we need to keep that in mind. Training diverse teams, bringing them in, bringing them to the table, making sure that we're all talking about this.
It strikes me that if you're going to a space like this that's an all-new 21st century Auto 2.0 space, there's a lot of different learnings there. It's not just the same thing they've been doing for 100 years. Right?
It's not going to last forever.
Right. For sure. We're out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Glenn Stevens.
All right, one more thing to do. So thank you to our panel. I was taking notes, and a lot of what they talked about today will certainly help us shape things. But every year we give a Volunteer of the Year award. We don't call it a Member or an Investor of the Year, but we've been doing this for several years now, and we've had different people from different parts of the industries and companies. But basically what we look at and say, who's like always there for us? I mean, and we have a lot of you who are always there for us. And whether they're sponsors or committee leaders or people who show up, but people who are really, who love this industry, who are champions for this industry. And this year it was pretty easy. So we selected Mark Montona, Lax Systems. And if you don't know Lax, it's a global supplier headquartered on the west side of the state with almost 3,000 employees right here in Michigan and 25 different plants. But we get to have some of Lax every day with us. And we just want to congratulate and thank Mark. And what we did is, Sandy referenced we'd come back to the artwork that was created. We turned the cover into a piece of art, which will sit on the desk. And so that is our award this year, is literally a piece of art that that Tyler helped create. So Mark, congratulations. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Glenn. I really appreciate it.
There you go.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody in the room. I guess I think I've been probably part of this with Lax since 9 or 10. We had a meeting on this floor in the corner, and I think MICHauto's come a long way. I grew up in Detroit area. When I was a kid, there was a tool maker next door who knew Henry Ford personally, the old man. To see the changes in this industry are incredible. And leave you with this. I mean, Lax, we are a traditional parts manufacturer, if you will, based in Grand Rapids. And as we look out, and we have our own journey of having change upon us, yet we make traditional componentry. I think a lot of the people in this room, like us, who are traditional parts manufacturers, have a journey of adapting to the new economy wherever it may be. And MICHauto, and thanks to Glenn, Sandy, Caitlin, Tabitha, Rob, when you were involved, helping a lot of us bridge that gap to the new economy. Many of our customers are faced with this. Their profits are derived from the old economy, if you will, yet massive sums are being put into the new economy. And this journey, frankly, a lot of us don't know where it's going to end. So we lean in, we participate, and MICHauto allows us to do that. And thank you and all the investors for all that you do.
Thanks, Mark.
Appreciate all you do.
All right, thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
Okay, final thing. I just want to thank our sponsors one more time. MEDC, Planet M. I was thinking about it backstage with regards to the MEDC. A lot of you work with them, but I mean, there's been some big wins on a regular basis. The FCA new plant doesn't happen without the Planet M and FCA or MEDC team, and then the Waymo announcement that that was recent. That's really enabled because of the work they do. And the Planet M. Raise your hand if you've been to the startup landing zone at WeWork. Okay, not everybody has been there. I would encourage you to make a visit to the Planet M landing zone, because that's where these new startups are incubating, and that's where they're connecting with the traditional OEMs and suppliers who also have office space there. That's where mobility solutions for the city of Detroit are being worked on, led by Ford. So there's a lot going on there. It's growing, and we continue to grow it, and we're going to continue to grow it with our partners. But also Intiva Products, Phoenix Contact, Mala, and Continental Structural Plastics. Thank you for your ongoing support. With that, thanks for being here today. We're going to keep pressing forward with your help and with your involvement. So thanks and have a great day.